Welcome to the Kidlit Distancing Social. I am Laura Backus, publisher of Children's Book Insider, the Children's Writing Monthly. And we are here on the Tuesday after Thanksgiving. Time has no meaning right now. For those of you who are new to us, who are maybe watching on replay for the first time, we have been publishing our Children's Book Insider newsletter for 30 years. This year is our 30th anniversary year. And if you are interested in checking us out, we have a special offer just for our Kidlit Socialites, $5 a month. And you get the electronic newsletter delivered to your inbox every month. It's about 20 pages long. It has market information, it has articles on writing, it has interviews with authors, editors, agents, all kinds of stuff in it. It also has a special spotlight interview every month with either an agent or editor, and they give us a special above the slush pile code that our subscribers can use to submit to them for usually 30 days. And your submissions will jump over the slush pile and get read first. So that's really cool. And our CBI Clubhouse membership site goes with the newsletter, and it is packed with all kinds of articles and videos and cool stuff from our 30 years in business. So writeforkids.org/CBI. So every week we do a little Where in the World, where you get to guess some literary place after I show you a picture. And this one should be fairly easy for a lot of you. I apologize for the graininess of the photograph. It's old, but give me your best guess as to where this is in the chat box. And like I said, some of you are probably going to get this immediately. It's a pretty famous place. And it is in the United States. I'll give you that clue. We've done a lot of overseas ones. So you can throw your best guesses in the chat box. And the place has literary significance. Come on, give me a guess. I know someone, just throw something out there. Just throw out a guess. I'll give you another clue. This is a hotel. But it's significant. The Ritz in New York? No, it's not the Ritz, but you are in the right vicinity, Diane. I'll give you all one more 30 seconds to guess. Not the Plaza, not the Waldorf. Plaza has a cool literary connection. Thank you, Beth. I will use that one at some point. Carlton, Hilton, no. No, yes, it's the Algonquin Hotel. Josette got it. So do you know the significance of this hotel in New York? It is, I will give you the next slide, the Algonquin Round Table, which was an informal group of American literary men and women who met daily for lunch on weekdays at a large round table in the Algonquin Hotel in New York City during the 20s and 30s. They began in 1919, and within a few years, its participants included many of the best-known writers, journalists, and artists in New York City. Among them were Dorothy Parker, Alexander Wolcott, Haywood Broun, Robert Benchley, Robert Sherwood, George S. Kaufman, Franklin Adams, Mark Connolly, Harpo Marx, Russell Krauss. You can see some of them gathered here in this photograph. It became celebrated in the 1920s for its members' lively, witty conversation and urbane sophistication. Gradually, the members went their separate ways, and the last meeting of the Round Table was in 1943. So this is what it looks like today. If you go into the Algonquin dining room, looks pretty much the same, except they have that drawing or painting in the back, which is kind of a caricature of the famous literary figures who met there. Josette says she's had drinks there. Nice. I would love to go there for a drink right now, personally. But wouldn't you love to be a fly on the wall in those lunch conversations? I think that would have been awesome. Okay, so send me your where in the worlds. You can take a picture. It can be, you can be in the picture or not. It's up to you. A literary landmark or somewhere that inspires your writing, or doing something, some writing related activity. If there's some cool place in your town you want to show us, anything like that. Email me a brief description of where you were and permission to use the photo, and attach the photo as a JPEG, and I will use it on a future Kidlit distancing social. Email it to mail@writeforkids.org and put "where in the world" in the subject line. Now, normally we do celebrates, but I didn't get any from you guys this week. And that's okay, because we had, the last 2 weeks, we had a lot of really great celebrations. So I want to remind you, and those of you who are new, that anything you want us to celebrate with you, you finished your first manuscript, you found an agent, you found a critique group that works for you, you got a book published, anything that you want us to celebrate, send us your good news. Email it to mail@writeforkids.org and put "celebrate" in the subject line, and we will feature you on a future distancing social. And if you have a book come out and you want to also send me a photo of the book cover, I'll put that up too. So be sure to do that. I expect lots of good news from you all by next week. So because, you know, you didn't send me anything, you get to hear our good news. So we next Tuesday, December 8th, during the day, we're still having a distancing social that night. We are hosting a webinar called Writing for the School and Library Market, which is being presented by Lionel Bender. And he is a book packager whose company works with publishers producing books for the school and library market. And he also himself has written over 70 books for the school and library market. And we're very excited about this, because for those of you who hate the idea of having to find an agent or having to promote your work, guess what? You don't have to do that if you write for the school and library market. And the other cool thing is, once you get established, you build some relationships with packagers or editors at publishers that specialize in these books. They start coming to you with writing assignments. Isn't that awesome? So you just get to write. So we're very excited about this webinar. You are going to learn all sorts of great stuff you can see on this slide. So because you are here, you are on our mailing list, and we will be sending out details tomorrow, probably toward the end of the day tomorrow, an email with all the sign up information and everything. It will be $47 to attend live. If you wait and buy the replay after, which you'll be able to, it's going to be $67. So $47, you can attend live, and you will have lifetime access to the replay. So if you want to register for the live event, but you can't make it live, you'll still get that replay access lifetime. And he's got a really hefty PDF packet that's going to go with this, that has a sample book proposal in it, guidelines, a list of book packagers and publishers who publish for the school and library market, all kinds of great stuff. This is going to be really good. So for those of you who are interested in writing nonfiction for this market, this is for you. And also, I know several authors who write for this market, and they make a lot of money on school visits. Not during the pandemic, of course, but in normal times, because teachers love having these authors come into the classroom because they're using their books in the classroom. And so that's another great thing about writing for this market. So keep an eye out for that email. So I have some great links of interest. This one is cool, and because you're here live, you get the scoop. Tomorrow, there is going to be a live webinar held by the Stimola Literary Studio. 2 of their agents are going to be on live, and they are going to be talking about the books they're looking for, and they will be taking some select pitches in the chat. So this is awesome. You have to register ahead of time, and I made you a bit.ly link here, bit.ly, meet the agents. And it is at 5 p.m. Eastern tomorrow, December 2nd. So, and they specifically emailed me and said, invite your people to come. So you all are the chosen few. So check that out. You see that there will be 2 agents who pretty much represent the range of children's books here. And that's going to be very exciting. So I hope you all register and check that out. If you have, I just want to give you a little tip here as far as pitching something in the chat. If you have a manuscript that is truly ready to go, that is truly ready to be seen by an agent, go ahead between now and tomorrow evening, write up a quick little pitch that maybe a couple sentences that sort of gives a sense of the hook of your manuscript, gives the title, the age range, so that they know the audience and sort of the tone. So the hook, the sentence or 2 of description would show if it's funny or if it's, you know, a very sort of emotionally driven story, or if it's nonfiction, you know, sort of the focus you're going to take, and have that ready to go so that when they ask for it, you can paste it right in the chat box. I think it's going to be very similar to a Twitter pitch. But if you're not ready yet, listen to what they have to say. And if you feel one of these agents is the right fit for you, file away their information, polish up your manuscript before you submit. You have 1 shot. So you want to make sure that you're ready for it. Okay, that's my spiel on that. Here's another cool thing I just want to tell you about. A lot of you could make this happen in your own town. This is from the San Diego Union Tribune. There is a natural area near San Diego that they created a storybook hike. And basically they took pages from a picture book, they laminated them, put them on these posts, and put them along a trail so that kids could walk along the trail and read the story, which I think is awesome. So I bet a lot of you could make these happen where you live. And this is something you could do if you're a self-published author or traditionally published author. You obviously want to work with whoever is managing the natural area or the city park or wherever that you might want to do this. But I just think this is such a great idea. So here's a link to that article, bit.ly/storybook hike. You can see more information about what they did and do something like this in your town. I love it. Bonnie asked, Bonnie said they did something like that near to you. Great. Diane asked, did they say how many pitches they will accept from each person? No, I don't have any details. I imagine, I imagine 1 pitch. You know, usually in these things, you're not allowed to pitch 4 or 5 things. In the chat box, you know, it might be different once you're submitting to them, and you can ask that question during the live event tomorrow. All right. So now I get to introduce my lovely guest that I'm very excited about. So Lea Lyon has illustrated 6 award-winning trade picture books and a middle grade novel in verse, which was published in 2019 by Henry Holt, called It Rained Warm Bread. Her books, all still in print, address topical social issues such as bullying, children with disabilities, same-sex marriage, different ethnicities and cultures, etc., and have landed on many prestigious recommended reading lists. She co-authored her newest picture book, Ready to Fly, How Sylvia Townsend Became the Bookmobile Ballerina, with Alexandra LaFay, which was illustrated by Jessica Gibson and published by HarperCollins just this past January, to rave reviews. And I've seen that book on several recommended reading lists. For 10 years, Lee was also the illustrator coordinator for the San Francisco South region of SCBWI, where she organized an annual children's book illustrator conference featuring nationally famous illustrators, art directors, and editors. So we're going to talk about a lot of really interesting stuff tonight. So Lee, welcome to the Distancing Social. You can turn on your camera. Nice to see you.
Hello.
Hello, there you are. And I want to remind people, if you have questions for Lee as we're talking, please put them in the Q&A box so that I can keep track of them. And we'll get to those in a little bit. So welcome, Lee. Thank you for being here and for talking about your various experiences with writing and illustrating.
Thank you for having me.
Sure. So I wanted to start, we have a lot of people here who are either beginning illustrators or writers who don't really understand the illustration process. And I wanted to ask you, what is the process an illustrator goes through when being assigned a manuscript by a publisher?
Okay. An editor will send a manuscript to an illustrator offering them the job to illustrate it. First thing you do is read it.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to like it. You're going to be illustrating this book for maybe 9 months.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to live with this book. And if there's something that you don't like about it, you really shouldn't. It's not fair to the author for you to do it.
Sure.
So you don't have to accept. I fortunately have never had that situation. So, because I've liked the way they're published, the way they're written. So once you accept the deal, you read it again and again. And the first thing I do is figure out where the page breaks go. And based on what in the words are going to make the reader want to turn the page. And then my image will also lead the reader's eyes to that edge of the book to turn the page. And hopefully, the writer obviously has been thinking of that too. Where will the page breaks be? What will make it exciting you got to see what happens next. And hopefully an illustrator will find the same ones. But basically, when an author gets a contract to have their book made into a picture book, it's sort of not their baby anymore.
Right.
Because the editor and the art director find an editor who adds his or her own spin to it. Mm. And so that's my job to do.
Right.
As an illustrator. If you're writing and illustrating to both, then you could figure that all out as you're going. Mm-hmm. So once I have figured out where I want the page breaks, I get one of these and do thumbnail sketches. It's a storyboard. And so for each page that I've marked in the manuscript, I do a little sketch of what I've been envisioning all these weeks, in my head for images that I can see that go with this. And that takes a bit of time. They're rough sketches, but it still takes a bit of time figuring out, because you can see the whole flow of the book and you want to make sure you can see how the whole thing works together. So once I have, agreed with myself that this is fine, I email it to the editor, the manuscript with the page breaks and the thumbnails, for feedback and to see if she likes where I'm going with this. And sometimes, they have suggestions that come back, I was thinking more this, and, I haven't done serious drawings yet, so it's easy to change directions at this point. So we go back and forth, and I look at this as a team effort, because it is. So I'm always unless I think it's a silly idea, which of course I wouldn't say, I'm willing to change things because for the project. So once I once we've agreed on the thumbnails, I find models. My painting is rather realistic, and I can't draw these things out of my head. I need a model in front of me or a photo of a person doing this. So I find kids who, for the different projects, who would be excited to do this with me. And it's just worked out. It's the most fun of the whole project, I tell you. So 3 of my books take place in schools. And at first I thought, where am I going to find 25 kids to be models for this book? And then I thought, duh, how about a classroom? Mm-hmm. So I've done that 3 times, and it's just been wonderful. You have to get the principal's permission. And then because I'm taking photos of the models, they have to have parents sign permission slips, even though I'm not using the photos in the actual book. So then I go make an appointment with the teacher. The editor and I have figured out what age kids these would be. I haven't done any with animals, so that's why I'm talking kids. And then I go and meet with the class. And I start out always by doing a presentation. It's like a school visit. And I explain to them how picture books are made. And, you know, what I'm explaining to you guys, you know, what the illustrator does when they get it. And I will show them a drawing and then the painting itself, and then what it looks like in the book and all this. And then I read the manuscript to them, and being a picture book, it's not very long. And then with the teacher's help, they act out each scene in my thumbnail. And the teacher knows the kids, so she helps, or he, in one case it was a he, helps cast it, you know. And I start taking pictures, and I'm the cinematographer, really this time, because I'm taking pictures. And but I also take dozens and dozens of other photos of these kids throughout the few hours I'm with them, walking to recess, playing in the yard. I never know what I'm going to need, like for a background or reference for another book. I mean, it's just lots of good stuff.
What fun that must be to have the kids act out the story for you.
So much fun. With Lailah's Lunchbox, I went back with, I guess, the galley of the book to show them what the thing looked like. And I had to explain to them that not everybody in the class ended up in the book. Mm. And I said, and the only reason for that, I mean, you all would be fabulous in the book, but there aren't that many kids in the book. I mean, in a whole class picture there are, but you know, so it depended more on the composition. It's not because this kid is better or, you know, just the composition. And so one boy raised his hand and said, I know, you can list all of us in the credits. And I said, books don't have credits, you know, but I will dedicate it to your class. So I do. Anyway, then I take the drawings and I figure out which I want and draw from that and paint from that and back and forth with the editor to see. And I make a dummy, which is a mock-up of a book with just drawings. And that way you and the editor get the feel of what it's like to turn the page. At first I was illustrating Ready to Fly. And so this is, I happened to find my dummy of that.
Right.
So that it really, even if you're just writing a book and not going to be the illustrator, it's nice to do that. Even maybe at the thumbnail level. So you see where the words will be in the page and how, and I assume that every picture book writer has to know that a picture book is a certain number of pages with the front matter and all of that, because so it's 32 pages or 40 or 48. It has to be divisible by 8.
Right.
Because that's how they print it on a sheet of 8 spreads. So.
So
Yeah.
I think probably a lot of writers are a little surprised to hear that you have a lot to do with determining where the page breaks go.
I
And
know.
that has to do with a lot with the flow of the illustrations,
Yes.
you know. So I think that's really important for writers to know. Obviously, when you're writing in your head, you have an idea of where you think the page breaks should be. And if you write the book well, you're probably going to have pretty much the same page breaks as the illustrator would envision. But when you do add that visual element, sometimes those things need to change a bit. So writers need to be flexible with that.
And the illustrator doesn't work with the author.
Mm-hmm. Right.
The illustrator works with the art director and the editor. So that's why I was saying, when you get a contract for your book to be made into a picture book, you don't know what, you have to let go of your visions of what the book looks like.
Sure, sure.
Because it's hopefully going to be better than in your imagination.
Yes. Have you ever received a manuscript that had illustration notes on it from the author?
I really haven't.
Mm-hmm.
But if I did, they would probably be few.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can see an illustrator note when there's no other way to know what's showing on the page.
Right.
Because it's not clear in the words.
Mm-hmm.
And it could be that editors take out the notes before they send it to the illustrator.
I think a lot of them do.
Yeah,
yeah, because they don't want to, they want you to be able to envision the book as you see it. They don't want to limit your vision with any kind of notes. Right.
Sometimes, well, I've illustrated mostly for a small publisher, Tilbury House. And so I have gotten in touch with the author when I had questions like certain questions about, what is this? Oh, and in one of them, it was a cream roll. This little girl, oh, a cream roll. I thought, what is a cream roll? Well, it turns out it's like a Hostess something or other, but it's a different brand and they have it in the East and not, So I had to ask, what are you talking about?
Right.
So it was,
yes.
Anyway,
Well,
so to clarify that kind of thing.
Well, and I was going to ask you, so the books you've illustrated do address those topical social issues, and also children with disabilities, same-sex marriage, different ethnicities and cultures. Do you do research as an illustrator for certain kinds of details? And does the author ever provide any of their research to you?
They don't really.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't had any of that, but several of these are true stories. And so I have ended up asking the editor if I could, or if I or she could ask the author, gee, could this be happening? Or
Right.
is it, and what's interesting, the book I did called Keep Your Ear on the Ball. Where is it? It's here somewhere. About a visually impaired boy in a regular classroom. It's based on a true story. The teacher who was the teacher of this actual kid wrote it finally. And so to get it as realistic as I could, I mean, I don't know anything about visually impaired students in a classroom. Mm-hmm. I found a school, a local school that it has visually impaired kids mainstreamed in their regular classes. And they had this wonderful resource person for them, whom I wish I had stayed in touch with because she was wonderful. And so not only did this class of the right age kids have a couple of blind kids, but one of them, they even had a Braille machine. And there was a Braille machine in the book. And so this was perfect. The issue was, though, the boy I was going to use as the model for the main character was named Mohammed, and he was Middle Eastern. Mm-hmm. Because this was a true story about a boy with, medium brown hair, medium brown, a Caucasian, obviously. I had to make it, I couldn't use his face as the character.
Hmm.
the model. And, you know, I explained it. I said, it's only because it's a true story about a real person. Otherwise, of course, yeah. So what I did, what I made sure, so I used Mohammed's body and body language, and I put another kid's head on it.
Hmm.
And what I did, because to be fair and because I cared, I made sure that Mohammed was just one of the other kids
Mm-hmm.
in one of the seeing kids, you know, in the book. So he was actually in it more than Davy. So now with Lailah's Lunchbox, which is about Ramadan,
Mm-hmm.
I knew very little about Ramadan. And so I learned. I did a lot of research, looked up a lot of images. Interesting. From the text of the book, I knew that this girl, this 5th grade girl, did not wear a headscarf, because in it she says, they don't even know I'm Muslim, the kids in her class. So I knew that. So I found models. I found, well, I found models and then used the class. But I was going to show this. For some things, like in this image, there was a flashback to Abu Dhabi where the character was from. Mm-hmm. She was finally old enough to fast for Ramadan, and she was all excited until she realized these kids in Atlanta aren't going to know why I'm not bringing my lunch. You know, and so anyway, it all works out. But I was going to put a pattern on the edges of the pictures that were flashback. And it occurred to me, I know nothing to that extent about the Middle East. It could be that a pattern from one country is not accepted even in another. So at that point, I knew that it was a true story that the author had written. And I knew that they weren't from Abu Dhabi originally. So I had to ask her where they from. They were from Pakistan. So I looked up Pakistani designs, and that was fine. And she did send me some pillows with designs. And what was the best of all, when she looked at the art, she said, "Lee, I felt at home." Oh, it was just amazing. She said, "You know, the pillow," in this picture, the pillow that she's leaning on, my mother has that pillow, you know. It's like, oh, wow. Anyway, there were some others.
So that's, yeah, it's very interesting, because again, from the author's perspective, you think, oh, the author's researched so much for the story, and you forget that the illustrator has to do the same thing.
Yeah,
to make definitely. It authentic as well.
One more thing, sometimes, like in Say Something, the bullying book, the last line, well, the protagonist is noticing people getting bullied, and she's proud of herself that she doesn't do it, but she also doesn't say something. That's what it's called. And then she ends up getting bullied and nobody does anything. So at the last image, she's on the bus, she sits next to the girl who always sits alone. And the last line was, "She's really funny." Well, I, as the illustrator, had to make sure that it was funny, amusing, not funny, weird. Because it occurred to me that and so I did this. Laughing together. And that really was clear. So those are some of the things one has to think about.
That's really interesting. Well, and my next question was going to be, if you are an author who is self-publishing and you're looking for an illustrator, what are the kinds of skills you need to be looking for? You know, you can find a lot of people who can draw a beautiful portrait.
Yes.
But illustrating a picture book is a completely different skill. So what kind of skills should someone be looking at if they're going through an illustrator's portfolio?
An artist who's illustrating not only has to draw well, they have to be able to draw the same character again and again and again and have it be recognizable.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one reason that I use models, because if you have the same child modeling for the character, it's easier. And also I get the body language and the proportions better. But
Mm-hmm.
so they have to be able to do that. They have to know about page turns, and that the illustrate, there should be nothing in the image that makes the reader's eye go to the left. You know, it should all be leading to the, I mean, some people could be facing the other way, but the main thrust is to the right. The illustrator is basically the casting director and the cinematographer and the director, because they're directing them. And I suppose if it's an independently published book, she can work together with the author to figure that out. But if nothing else, they have to look at a lot of picture books.
Mm-hmm.
And I found online some very good articles about that, about what to look for. So they are available.
Yes. And even things like, don't put anything important in the illustration right
Oh,
in the middle of the page.
course.
Where the spine's going to be.
Of course, the gutter.
The gutter.
The gutter, the middle where the book folds.
Mm-hmm.
You can't put anything important there.
Yep. Yep.
Another thing, it has to be consistent. If I do this at school visits, I say, if a character's on one page is walking through the door, she better be wearing the same clothes on the next page when she comes out the other side. And then I say, unless it's a magic door, and then all bets are off. But so, and you have to make sure, and sometimes I flip a photo because it's better composition. Well, I better move the barrette to the other side of the hair so that it matches the page before. I have to make sure that they're not suddenly left-handed. You know, all these things you have to think about, because if anybody's going to find an error like that, it'll be a child.
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely. Yeah. And
there are just very good books for an artist of how to go about this too,
mm-hmm.
along with the society, the SCBWI
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The book.
Right, right. I imagine too that you have to be able to, if someone has written a story that's very emotionally based, that is maybe a quieter story, but it's a lot about what's going on inside a character, the illustrator has to be able to bring that out to demonstrate in a visual way, so that you don't have just a lot of pictures of a character sitting there thinking, you know. Definitely. It's got to look interesting.
It has to look. And an illustrator, one reason that an editor chooses an illustrator is to enhance the story that's in the text. Subtly. I mean, it could show, well, if nothing else, it shows the environment and the bedroom and, you know, the neighborhood, whatever. But also it could show other things happening in the background, in the family.
Mm-hmm.
In one of my books, the kids that were modeling for it, one of them had a golden retriever who was in almost all the pictures. I put him in the book, even though he wasn't mentioned at all. Because I also had heard that kids like to follow there's the dog, there's the dog. So
mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah, having that sort of subtext in the illustrations where there's another little plot element, I know kids love, because they're hearing the story being read to them and they're looking at the pictures. And so my favorite illustrators are always the ones who add that other little surprise layer in the pictures. Yeah.
Also, you can do a lot of mood and emotion with the color palette, the shadows, you know, and you don't want just to show a conversation, because you can't do that page after page. So there's just so much to think about.
Yes. Well, those are some good things for authors to be looking at if they
are. Yes, definitely.
For sure. So let's talk about your book, your newest book, Ready to Fly, How Sylvia Townsend Became the Bookmobile Ballerina, which is awesome. And you wrote this
I
book.
wrote this.
Mm-hmm.
I did not illustrate it because it's about an African-American girl.
Mm-hmm.
And the editor wanted an African-American illustrator, which was perfectly fine with me, made total sense. So a neighbor of mine, a good friend who lives across the street, called me up one day. She was taking tap dancing lessons at a local senior center from a woman who was a ballerina originally. She drove her home and heard this story about the Bookmobile, how she taught herself how to, she couldn't have ballet lessons as a child because she was Black, and ballet in the 50s was for white girls. And so she got library books out of the Bookmobile and taught herself how to dance.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a true story. And then she taught her sisters, and then the neighborhood kids wanted to learn. She ended up being in the school talent show and ended up getting taken under wing by a Russian ballerina who had opened a new ballet school and had different prejudices, I always say. Didn't grow up with that prejudice. So the first thing I did though was to get introduced to Sylvia, and I interviewed her for a couple of hours and heard this wonderful story, and I recorded it, and I showed her some of the other books that I had done so that she knew I was legit. Mm-hmm. And her grown daughters were there, and they involved. So then I started to write it, and I had to, I had 2 hours of interview. I had to break it down to picture book size. I mean, it just cried out to be a picture book. Mm-hmm. Ballet and Bookmobile and, thinking out of the box, basically, never giving up. So the end is that she ended up being a real ballerina, and she's had a ballet school in Richmond, California for over 40 years. So I was illustrating it at first. And the interesting thing is that I was at the time taking Skype illustration lessons from E.B. Lewis, who is, of course, African-American, and he was helping me illustrate this book. And I also, to use models, Alexandria Lefay, I had met her at a conference and fell in love with her little daughter, who was of color. Mm-hmm. So even though they lived in Illinois and I'm in California, I was emailing her, could you pose her like this and take a picture? And said, so I was using her daughter as a model. And then we decided that it had to be the other daughter too, because I couldn't leave her out. Finally, Alexandria said, what is this for? And I guess I hadn't told her. And so I told her, and she said, oh, I would so love to be a part of a book that had my kids in it. And because I figured she's a much more experienced author than I, she even has a doctorate in children's books. Mm-hmm. I said, well, why don't you write it with me? And so that's how it became co-writing. I had, worked on it for over a year, but she really helped me with active verbs and making it, she punched it up. It was her idea about the wings, so it was a good collaboration. And then I have an agent who is my agent project by project. So I sent her the story and my illustrations. And she loved the story. She said, this has to be a picture book. But an editor is going to want an African-American illustrator because neither of the writers is Black. And I said, fine with me. I totally understand. And she was right. And then it turned out that the editor at HarperCollins who contracted the book is African-American. And so she was editing it with us and making it, she was vetting it for us as we were editing with her help. Mm-hmm. So that's how that happened. And
that's great. That's great. So essentially what you've written here is sort of an authorized biography because the subject
Yeah.
told you their story and basically gave you permission to write it and do the interview. How is that actually working with the subject? I imagine on the one hand, it's wonderful because you get all the facts that you need. Did you feel you had creative freedom with it as well?
I had a lot of creative freedom. They didn't know anything about creating a picture book.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked with Sylvia, she had had a stroke already. And so I worked with one of her daughters a lot. I still am. And so they helped with the history of Black ballet and, things that are in the afterword, the author's note. And I didn't know much. I didn't know anything really about ballet. So I learned what these different terms meant. Mm-hmm. And I even, well, that's irrelevant. But when I showed her daughter, Shannon, one of my paintings for the book, she said, "That doesn't look like my mother." And I realized later she probably meant that she didn't have the same color skin. She wasn't as dark as she should be, which I could easily have changed. But then it ended up being illustrated in this stylistic way, which was probably just as well. E.B. Lewis said, when the editor wanted to, my agent sent that E.B. Lewis would be happy to illustrate it, but they wanted this kind of style. So
yeah.
So he didn't get the gig.
I imagine that the whole family is thrilled with the book.
Oh, they're
How
just.
could they not be?
And they're getting some royalties. So.
Yeah, well, that's great. That's great. It's a story that needed to be told. It really did.
Oh, well, I have to say one funny thing, if I'm allowed to say this. At one point, Sylvia said to me that a friend of hers said, "Oh, right, some white lady is going to write a book about your life." And then when we got the contract, I said, "Sylvia, remember that friend of yours? Would you tell her, yes, some white lady is writing a book about your life?" She laughed.
That's great. That's great. And I'm glad that, I think the editor and the illustrator are a perfect choice. Like you said, they gave it the authenticity it needs, and it's just beautiful. So.
And the Scholastic Book Club picked it up.
I know. That's wonderful.
Which they even liked the way it was being published and printed by HarperCollins. So they ordered them from them ahead of time.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, a lot of people don't know. Very often Scholastic prints their own edition of the books, but to buy them straight from the publisher, it's great. Yeah. So before we have a few questions I want to get to, but I have one final question for you here. You were the illustration coordinator for SCBWI San Francisco South, and you did that conference for 10 years. What tips did you pick up in doing that conference that illustrators might learn from, as far as what they should have in their portfolio, what kinds of things art directors look at when they're looking at portfolios, that sort of thing?
Okay. This too you can find online and on the SCBWI website, but just as I said, the artist has to paint the same person again and again. It's good to have several images of the same character in different settings, maybe one daytime, one nighttime. It should only be your best illustrations, because as somebody once said at a conference, I've been to 1 million SCBWI conferences, and I'll tell you, that's the way to go about it, to be at conferences, get involved, your things. You get to know people. It's such a wonderful community, children's book writers and illustrators. And they're not as competitive as many communities. Anyway, so also you should have your strong image at the beginning and at the end.
Okay.
And only put in animals if you are good at them. or, kids, make it your best shot. And people often ask, what if I'd use two different styles? Should I put those in the portfolio? There's mixed advice about that. If you're really strong and really enjoy both styles, you could put the second style in a few pages towards the end, but don't have them intermingled. And then the line is always, no matter what, it's the one style you don't want that you'll get an offer for. So be careful what you wish for. So at these illustrator conferences, first of all, because it was in San Francisco, and SCBWI is so respected in the industry, I got to invite the best art directors and editors and illustrators from back east, because I was offering them a free airfare and a free weekend in San Francisco. And so that made it wonderful. Brian Selznick, I think, is the only one who couldn't, because he had promised himself that he was going to not go to any conferences till he finished this book. So, and that was through his agent. Anyway, so what I did it for 10 years and ended up having an illustrator and an editor or art director they had worked on a book together with speaking at the same day. And that really was cool because they each gave their own presentation. Mm-hmm. But then they also discussed how they work together, and we really got to learn how it goes in a publishing house. And the San Francisco Bay Area has 3 very active regions, going all the way to Sacramento and down to Monterey. Mm-hmm. And so because of that, and because it's all basically driving distance, I made sure to invite illustrators from all the 3 areas. Mm-hmm. So because of that, we ended up having 75 illustrators attend, which people are amazed at, because illustrators don't often go to conferences as illustration things. Usually they can't afford it. But so the last one I did, there were 90 people in attendance, and it was just great. So because so many people wanted portfolio critiques, the 2 or 3 people speaking couldn't do them all. So I invited local publishers, art directors, and editors. We have Chronicle books here, but at the time we had Tricycle Books. We had some others that are not here anymore. And that's how I met Abby Simone, who's now Red Fox Literary, Simone, I guess is, who became my agent. Mm-hmm. She was invited, we became friends. And so there's the portfolio critique. We also had something called First Look, and illustrators would send in what they considered a really powerful image. Mm-hmm. And during the thing, I would make a PowerPoint of them and anonymously show them one at a time, and the panel would each give their 1 minute or less first impression. Oh. And then, gee, this is really strong. If you did this, it would be even stronger. So we all got to see the advice given to each individual illustrator. And it was just, it all sinks in. Yeah. We also had a portfolio display. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So putting your start and finish strong, I think that's really.
Yes, start and finish strong.
Do you advise? Mm-hmm. Oh, I was going to ask if the illustrator is not also a writer, do you advise that they take some public domain story and at least illustrate several pages of it so they can show consistency?
Yes, that is often recommended.
Okay.
And then you could even put the words in.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
But yes, that's because otherwise it's so, what these images have to do is tell a story in one image with no words, basically. Mm-hmm. And that's so hard. And they have to have emotion and anticipation. Mm-hmm. And I forgot what the third one is, but make you want to turn the page.
Sure, sure. Yeah.
And it's really hard in a vacuum
Yes.
to do that kind of image. I'm still struggling with it in a portfolio. I'm just talking about portfolios. I need to go redo mine, but
Right, right.
I'm doing more writing now than illustrating. So, oh dear.
Well, that's some wonderful advice. We have a couple questions I want to get to. There's a couple questions here for me. I'm just going to get out of the way.
Sure.
Robin asks, is how to pitch a book in CBI Anywhere. I imagine, Robin, you're asking for that editor panel that's going to be tomorrow night that I mentioned. If you look on the replays of our Kidlit distancing socials, go to writeforkids.org, and on the homepage there, you'll be able to see the replays. We did a social a couple months ago on Twitter pitch parties. And PJ McIlvain, who was my guest, who picture book pitch is her thing. She started that pitch party. She gave a lot of really great information on how to pitch on Twitter. And you would use the same techniques for pitching in a chat box. And so I would suggest you watch that before tomorrow night if you missed it, or rewatch it if you were there. That'll give you a lot of good tips. And Robin also asks about getting the newsletter. Robin, why don't you email me those questions directly, laura@writeforkids.org, and we will set you up with that. Okay, so for Lee, Linda says, I recently reviewed my first draft from the illustrator and I was not happy. It was obvious the illustrator had not read my manuscript. Any suggestions on how I proceed from here? Linda, can you please tell us if this is a book you're self-publishing or if this is with a publisher? I know that some small presses will show the authors the sketches. You know, most publishers don't. Most publishers keep the author and illustrator completely apart until the book is finished. But a couple small presses have a slightly different policy, but let's self-publish. That's what I thought. So how do you suggest she proceed in that situation?
My first thought is find another illustrator. Now, when you're self-publishing, you could actually work with the illustrator throughout.
Mm-hmm.
See early on, I hope that these weren't all paintings. That's another thing the artist should know. Don't do all the paintings, you know. Make them drawings and a few finished pieces of art so that you can tell what the book will look. And that's when you submit, if you're an author illustrator and you submit to an editor at a publisher, never do all the paintings. Because no matter how wonderful they are, the editor is going to want changes.
Right. Linda says they were drafts, so I imagine they were sketches, something like that.
And that's it. You know, you're hiring the illustrator. Talk to them. And it's a sad situation. And there's the question: if you do find another, do you have to pay this one? But that's not anything I know. So.
Yeah, it depends on what sort of your agreement was. Hopefully in your agreement with this illustrator, you had some writing about how many different versions of the sketches they would give you and that kind of thing. So, but I think Lee's right. A conversation is the way to start. And, you know, a Zoom call or over the phone or something where you can say, you know, did you actually read the book? It seems like you didn't.
I wouldn't say
not that blatantly.
Not that directly.
Yeah.
At the beginning.
Yes.
Do it more subtly, but because you don't want their backup right away.
Sure.
But yeah, and see what happens. And
yeah, it could be this person interpreted your story in a very different way than you envisioned it.
Very good point.
And I think those are the kinds of things you can talk about, is, you know, and maybe come to some more middle ground on, you know, how the story is being interpreted visually.
You could even talk page by page and, you know, see why the illustrator interpreted these words that way. And that might help.
Yeah, because as a self-published author, you are also acting as the editor and the art director. So those are the kinds of things in a traditional publishing situation, the editor or art director might say to the illustrator, we didn't see this, you know, can you explain to us how you interpreted these words in this way? And so you were free to do that as a self-published author because you were fulfilling those roles as well.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in a traditionally published situation as an author, you wouldn't be able to do that. So, but I agree with Lee. You want to be diplomatic and not illustrator on the defensive because they thought they were doing what you wanted. So,
yes. And a great job.
Yeah. All right. Kate says, I'm so glad to hear that someone else uses models. I've heard all sorts of things about why you shouldn't. Have you ever gotten pushback or criticisms about that?
Not at all. And I meant to tell this funny story. I once was at a conference and Patricia Polacco, who I hope you all know who she is, a fabulous author illustrator. I asked her if she used a model because her illustrations aren't totally realistic, but they're obviously, you know, people. And she said to me, Lee, if any illustrator tells you they didn't use a model, they're lying. Sometimes the model will be a clay figure or a model plane or car, but still, you can't just draw this stuff out of your head.
Yep. Well, in our Picture Book Summit online workshop this past October, Sophie Blackall was one of our keynote speakers. She uses models, and
yeah,
she's done 2 Caldecots, I think, and yeah.
You don't trace the picture; you draw from it. It's a reference, but still, I mean, the best way to get the right proportions and the right body language and the right expressions, I mean, is to use a model. And then you also get the interaction between the people. I have one quick thing. One of the books that I did 15 years ago called Playing War, which is still in print. So this it's about friends who are playing war, but one of their new friends during the summer was from another country, and it turns out he's been in a war. And so he doesn't want to play war. And they end up realizing that the friendship is more important. So in the last 6 months, Tilbury House, the publisher, wanted to reissue it as a paperback, but with a new cover. And so I made a new cover, and it just came out in November. The difficulty here was that my models had all grown up. They were all out of college already. And fortunately, I had a bunch of photos. You know, I took a bunch of photos of the kids. So I found 2 photos of their heads that would work. And then I just got the bodies online. I found pictures of kids in those positions and pictures of, 2 hands holding each other, and then had to make them fit. And it took a long time. That's what I did for the beginning of the coronavirus. I was working on this.
Oh, wow.
And the beauty of it, even a better bonus. Oh, this is so I got to fix some of the images inside that were driving me crazy.
That's nice.
They let me, so.
That's nice.
Photoshop, you can mix and match.
What writer or illustrator doesn't want the opportunity to do that, because I've talked to so many authors, especially who are incredible writers, and they always say, I wish I could go back and change this part of that book, Yeah,
we can certainly understand why a lot of actors say they never watch the film that they're in. The same thing, they're probably cringing the whole way through.
Absolutely. Dory asks, do you ever pay your models? I know you use kids mostly.
I haven't. I usually have them over for a meal, and we have a sort of either a potluck with their parents or something, but I probably should. I probably should have, and I probably should have gotten signed waivers from their parents, which I never did. It's never been a problem, though. but I only really spend a few hours with them.
Right.
Right. But I know, for instance, E.B. Lewis always hires his models. And oh, talking about, one of the questions was about research. I have a book, a Hanukkah book that takes place at the turn of the last century. I rented costumes from Fiddler on the Roof, wow, from a company that rents costumes to theater companies. And I just needed to get the measurements of my few models, and I rented it for a month. And I am having the time of my life. I really am having fun.
That is great.
A lot of work, but I'm really having fun.
I would say probably any illustrators listening, I would advise you always get signed releases from.
Definitely.
Just as a, you know.
I didn't know to at the time, at the beginning.
Sure. I mean, it wasn't.
And I was working with a small publisher who didn't mention that.
Sure.
If I had been working, you know, it wasn't really till I got an agent, I must say, that I got with Christy Ottaviano. And
but I imagine, as in most cases, I know if I was a kid and I was a model for an illustrator and I appeared in a book, I would be thrilled. I wouldn't payment would be the last thing for me.
Yeah, of course. It might be for the parent, though.
For the parent, sure.
But I also gave them copies of the book,
mm-hmm.
you know, but as I say, I just didn't know any better at the time.
Yeah.
And this book, this It Rained Warm Bread about the Holocaust,
mm-hmm.
I'm listed as the illustrator, but I really produced the whole thing. I found the agent, I found the publisher, I found Hope Anita Smith to rewrite the poetry.
Wow.
Gloria, this is about a teenager in the camps during the Holocaust who escapes, and he just died 2 years ago at age 92 in Los Angeles. But, and Gloria Moskowitz-Sweet, his daughter, was working in an anti-bullying program in the Bay Area. And she was telling this story about her father, one experience her father had, about there were upstanders, not bystanders. Everybody was turning away from this whole, whatever the Nazis were doing. But in one small town in Czechoslovakia, the cattle car stopped. These women didn't turn away, except they did to run into a bakery, come out, and they threw loaves of warm bread into the car, into the cattle car. They couldn't see the passengers. They couldn't see the people in the cattle car, but they knew that they were prisoners.
Right.
And there were armed Nazi guards outside the car. And they risked their lives, and the guards didn't do anything. And the protagonist, he thought that maybe it's because it was the end of the war and they didn't care anymore. Or they figured it's not going to rescue them anyway, but this gave the kid hope, and he was able to escape. But so Gloria was using my Say Something Bullying book, and she liked the way I illustrated. She emailed me and asked if I could illustrate this story, because she thought it should be a picture book. She wanted it to be a picture book. And I met with her and heard the wonderful story. And the first thing I had to tell her, you know, the author doesn't get to choose the illustrator. The publisher does. I said, but if we co-write it, then we can send my illustrations and still look professional. They aren't required to take them or to use them, but we look like we know how the game is played. And if she were an experienced children's book writer, I probably wouldn't have even suggested that, but she doesn't write books. So we started writing it together. Mm-hmm. And after one LA conference, I took, this is SCBWI again. I was so involved. I got to go to the conferences free because I was the illustrator coordinator. So I went to a lot of them. But I took a weekend thing on first pages, which was just fabulous. How to grab the reader in the first paragraph. Mm-hmm. And our homework assignment before the second day was to do the same thing with our own manuscript that we had with us. And so I found this line that Gloria had actually written. that was so powerful. And I thought, this is where it should start. Because we had the grandfather telling the grandkids the story. This is where it should start. And I realized that it was verse. And the next day in the next workshop, I read it out loud. And a woman behind me said, "Oh my God, that's World War II." It was dead silence. And then, so I suggested to Gloria that we try it in verse, which she didn't like the idea at first at all. And I said, "Hey, it's just an idea." It was a really good collaboration. So we ended up rewriting it in verse. And then it was advised that we make it a novella. And Abby, my agent, submitted it to editors, and they said the story's so powerful, the art's so powerful, the poetic voice isn't strong enough. And Gloria and I both realized that getting an editor to help us wouldn't be enough. We needed to get a poet. And there were many, many coincidences in this thing. But I asked Hope Anita Smith if she would do it. I had actually, the year before at a conference, gave her the dummy of this book. We really hit it off at this conference. And so I said, "Keep it, I can print it again." And I saw her again at the next year at the same party. And she said, "Whatever happened to that book?" I said, "Funny you should ask. We need a poet to make it sing." And she said, "I'd be happy to be your silent partner." And I said, "You don't have to be silent." And so, this book, it's an ALA book, ALA notable book, a Kirkus Best Nonfiction Middle Grade Book in Verse for 2019. I mean, I'm just great. And so I don't mind just being listed as the editor. It took 10 years also, you should all know. It took 10 years to get this thing published.
Well, I love how so many of your projects just sort of find their way through meetings and generosity and, you know, connections. That's just wonderful. And I think that spirit of putting the work first and not your ego is so important, so that these projects can see the light of day.
I went back to school when I was 40 to get an MBA, a master's in business and marketing. And in there, we learned how to work on teams, you know, and I think that had a lot to do with it. It also has given me the confidence to deal with these big art directors in New York and running this one-day conference every year made me get to use spreadsheets again and budgets. And so I stopped wishing I was still in the business world. But I really think it's all sort of come together and helped.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's great. Well,
and I'm proof that it's never too late.
Absolutely. I firmly believe that.
Yeah.
Last question here, and I think you've covered a lot of this already. Susan asks, what recommendations do you have for authors who are writing about diverse characters? So you talked about what you do as an illustrator as far as your research and that kind of thing. Would authors basically do the same sorts of things?
Yes. I'm working right now for the last few years on a middle school and high school narrative historical nonfiction, believe it or not, which I'm not illustrating, it'll be photos, archival photos. It's about African Americans in World War II. I'm doing it again. There's a reason though, and where I got the idea, she's behind me 100%, and she's anyway. I have done so much research about the Black press, about the segregated armed forces, I mean, all of this stuff for this book. And I've discovered that I love nonfiction because I like to tell a story, but I don't have ideas for stories. So nonfiction's perfect. And I don't know if you've ever heard of Betty Reed Soskin. Probably not. She is a 99-year-old park ranger, African-American, who a few years well, more than 4, obviously, years ago, she got to introduce Obama at the tree lighting ceremony at the White House.
I knew I'd heard her name. That's
yeah,
right.
she's been the Rosie the Riveter Museum. And if you people don't know what Rosie the Riveter is, you can look it up. All these young people. Is right near, it's like almost walking distance from me. So she would give talks 3 times a week there. She was an adult in Richmond during the Kaiser shipyards and all of that was right here where I live. It's across the bay from San Francisco. And so her thesis is that Rosie the Riveter is a white woman's story because she never saw a ship. She was working in a segregated union. And, and she's the most amazing storyteller. So she was an adult during World War II. And so, and she just stopped doing these talks because of the coronavirus.
Wow.
So one day I thought that, I think still that there should be a children's picture book biography of her. Not that I should write it even, but that there should be. And I introduced myself, showed her some examples of other wonderful picture book biographies. And she said she wasn't interested. And so something in my professional mind made me say, I totally understand. So if there were one children's book about the period you just were talking about, what would you like to see? I mean, this woman is the most wise, inspiring person I've ever met in my life. She immediately said the Double V campaign, which nobody's heard about. And it's about the Black press fighting 2 wars at once during World War II. Because I'm going too long, probably. Just briefly, African Americans loved their country and wanted to fight for their country, but why should they fight for freedoms in other countries that they didn't have here? So this newspaper thought of this idea, we'll have 2 V's, a V for victory overseas, a V for victory from the enemy without, a V for victory over the enemy within. And it became a whole big deal, and it ended up leading to a more advanced civil rights movement anyway.
Wow.
And so I started writing it, and she's thrilled. So
that's fascinating.
That's my story.
That's great. Well, you'll have to keep us updated on that book.
I will.
I want to know how that all turns out for sure. So
my agent's just about ready to submit it.
That's great. Well, when it gets sold, you'll send me a Celebrate announcement.
Absolutely.
I'll announce it. That's wonderful. Well, Lee, this has been great. Thank you so much.
I did take too long. I'm sorry.
Hey, it was fascinating. I learned a lot. I'm sure all our viewers did too. And I love having illustrators on. We don't get illustrators very often, and I can't draw anything, so I'm just in awe of anybody who can. So, and
I'm in awe of all the authors who have story ideas in their million story ideas in their mind.
Oh, I know.
It's just, but this has been wonderful. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you all for being here with us tonight. And we will see you next week. All right. Good night, everybody.